I hate to disappoint any of you who might be thinking that this is a vegan missive talking about the horrors of farming. A slightly different type of video that I wanted to do, just to kind of chat with you briefly. I was thinking last night, the farming can take you to some really incredibly beautiful places with babies being born in the springtime because that's what's going on right now on the farm. If you look on my channel, you can see in the shorts, there's a video I just uploaded with that title, well, with the title of The Best and Worst Days on the Farm. And I have a little short with some footage from last night when one of my sows had a litter of piglets. And as I'll tell you here in just a little bit, a little story about what happened and how, babies coming into the world on the farm is an opportunity for great beauty. And it's always super exciting because it's kind of like smashing a pinata, figuratively, hopefully, where you're going to find out like how many are there, how big are they, what, boys or girls, and in some cases, who's the daddy, and you get an idea to realize this surprise that you've been waiting on for the last, 3.5, almost 4 months. And it was, as farrowing often is, it was a very bittersweet and demanding experience, which, I would love to have one farrowing where it's just like neat, clean, easy, and there's no heartbreak and there's no tragedy. But at the same time, for all the difficulties, there are always opportunities to learn new things, and at the end of the day, I have to be responsible for the things that go wrong because I kind of make these things happen in a lot of ways, and so you kind of reverse engineer everything. So if you see the short on my page, it's about this litter of pigs being born, and most of the time, I find that my mamas have their babies when I'm, like, overnight, and so I'm not there to actually watch them give birth. So I come out in the morning and surprise, there's piglets, and then at that point, the babies are, they're there in whatever form that they are in. Hey, Lorado, and let's see who all is here. Stephanie Egbert, hi. Hey, guys. And I'd be interested to hear where you guys are watching from. And if you guys haven't already, love to have you guys subscribe to the channel and follow along as we're talking about some of the farming stuff here. Because really, what we want to do with these conversations is build community around farming. And I would love to have more people, even if you've never had any experience with farming and you don't think of yourself as being a farmer, there's opportunities and ways that we can get more people involved in joining. And part of it is growing community around this idea of making America farmers again, and that is going to be my, the hill that I'm trying to die on, hopefully not literally here. But and thank you for subscribing, guys. I appreciate that. That's awesome. Love to have more people here and to hear what, your feedback and what you guys think about this stuff. So whenever we're having babies and there's babies being born, a lot of times I get up in the morning, I go out, and there's piglets there, and they're either fine and doing great, or maybe some of them are squashed, but you don't have to necessarily deal with the, "Uh-oh, what's going on? Mama's moving. Is she gonna step on one of the babies?" You don't have that anxiety, and then the mama's all stressed out because you're there watching her, and she wants to attack you and steps on her babies in the process, and you don't wanna leave the babies because then mama's up and stepping on the babies, so you feel like you gotta stay there and do something to help, and it's very helpless at the end of the day. You feel very helpless because there's not much that you can do to actually help the mom. The best you can do is hopefully not get in the way too much. And sometimes, you dry off one of the babies, like you see in the short that I just posted. And, you can kind of keep them out of the way and maybe help them move around a little bit because when they're newborns, they're not super mobile. And if they're in an area where there's hay, which on a colder night, we want hay there to keep them warm. Hey, Neox, good to see you back again. You can ask me something. I may take a little bit to answer you just because I'm kind of rolling with the story, but go ahead. And so to make a long story short, last night I had this mama giving birth, and in the process of giving birth, there were 3 other piglets that were nearby. Now, I say piglets because they were smaller, and if you happen to look at that short, you can see them sort of in the background. They're the black and white spotted piglets, and I was thinking, like, we have a decent amount of co-farrowing where you have a couple of moms or a couple of pigs together, and one of them has babies, and, you hope for the best. Um, and you have to trust that whoever's not having the babies is going to be decent enough to the one who is having the babies. And there are instances where pigs will attack their own babies, where the mama will have one of her babies and then she'll go after it because she doesn't recognize that it came out of her, or where other pigs will attack the babies of another pig. And so I typically have not had a problem with this happening before, but I have had a couple other pigs occupying the area, um, and so as a result, when mama started giving birth last night, these pigs were actually orphans from the fall. Their mother died in the fall, not giving birth, but she died when they were only a couple days old. And what tends to happen is with human babies, a lot of what you're getting when you're first starting to get those first nutrients and you're nursing and you're getting a lot you're getting a lot of nutrients from mama's milk. It's not just nutrients that you're getting from her, you're also getting immunity. And so these 3 babies, they were most of the litter died because they didn't survive. And then these 3 were the only ones that I managed to keep alive. And from a financial standpoint, there's not really any way for me to make money off these because I'm not gonna sell these pigs to somebody else to raise because they're pretty stunted in their growth. Um, and so, my thought was I'm gonna try to keep them alive, and maybe we'll see if we can figure something out. So I'm just gonna pause here for a second. Neox says, "I'm allergic to horses. Can you show me a horse?" Never seen a horse before. Well, I have to tell you, I don't have horses, so, unfortunately, no, I cannot show you a horse. I can show you some big pigs. I got some 800-pound pigs, but I don't have any horses. That's a little above my pay grade, but I tell you what, if you guys subscribe to the channel and maybe one of these days, start super chatting and we get enough financial backing, I would love to, be able to have a horse so that I could make videos about my horses, but that horses are not cheap and they are fairly medically, like, pigs are really hardy. They can survive a ton of stuff, as I'm gonna get to in kind of the latter part of this story about the all the piglet drama from last night. But horses are it doesn't take much to mess up a horse, and they're real expensive. Pigs, you just anything that goes wrong, for the most part, either they're gonna die and there's nothing you can do, or you give them a shot of penicillin and maybe a little wormer, and they're gonna be okay. That's kinda like what the deal is with pigs. Like, I had a pig that the mama stepped on her when she was a couple of days old, and her whole, like, from her back leg to the middle of her abdomen, the skin was just torn off like this big flap, and it looked really, really grisly. So I said, I had my 22 and I was gonna, put her down. And I happened to be chatting with one of my friends, and I said, I got this piglet. She got stepped on. I'm just gonna put her down. And she said, well, send me a picture of her. So I took a picture of this pig with her stomach ripped open, and she said, oh, you know what? I bet she can recover from that. Just clean her up, put a little iodine on it, and maybe some not not mineral salt, Epsom salt, and soak her in that a little bit to help clean it up. And she was tiny, so I took her away from mama and everybody else, and she's, in pieces almost. And every day I cleaned her up, I cleaned her out, and wouldn't you know it, within about 3 weeks, 2, 3 weeks, she was all healed up, and she grew out, had piglets of her own, and I was gonna put a bullet in her head and put her down because I didn't think there was any way that she was gonna do anything other than just suffer miserably. And in that case, if I had just left her there, she probably would have been in a pretty bad way. But it really turned my head around in terms of the way that I think about the animals and how hardy they are and what they can heal from and what they can recover from. So I'm always of a mindset to try not to get emotionally involved because that can be dangerous and you can make dumb decisions with your animals. That's bad for you, it's bad for your family, and it can ultimately be bad for all of the animals if you're emotionally involved. But at the same time, I like an underdog, and I like to bet on my animals to do better and to beat the odds whenever I possibly can. So these 3 little orphans, their mother died last fall, and of course, they missed out on a lot of the nursing, and so in the first couple of months of a piglet's life, it's not meat that's developing and the muscle. The thing that's actually developing in those first several months, it's super critical, is the immunity so that they can survive in the dirt and with all the germs and the stuff that are around them. But there's also their frame and their skeleton, and so the amount of meat that a hog can put on, it's gonna be limited by the frame that you can hang that meat on. And so in the first several months, you build a good frame, which is like all the bones and the ligaments and the cartilage, and you get that all built, but you gotta have really good nutrition. And so these little piglets, their mother died, and it took me a couple of weeks to really get them transferred over to eating food. And usually it's, even when piglets are nursing, it's gonna be somewhere in the time frame of, like, 3 to 4 weeks where they're gonna start eating food, and then kind of in the 4 to 6 week time frame where they're gonna eat food instead of nursing and actually get closer to weaning, and then by 7 to 8 weeks, you can pull them off of mama, and they can eat without being at any kind of nutritional deficit. But these guys were underdeveloped, and they were stunted, and so I wanted to bet on them, and I said, "You know what? Maybe we can make up for it in the spring. I'll put them out on the pasture once they get some sunlight, they get some good forage, they'll, get out on the pasture, they'll make up for it, they'll grow, and then we can, either there was a couple of females and a male, and I figured the females specifically, I was interested in trying to keep them as breeders because they actually, when they were first born, I had kinda had my eye on a couple of them and said, "These are gonna be good animals maybe to keep in the herd as mamas." So, make a long story excruciating, they wound up not really growing big enough to do put in with the big pigs, and they were or, yeah, they were too small to put in with the big pigs, and so I kept them in and just said, "Alright, they can kinda be in the same area that the mamas are in that are farrowing." So, mama's having her babies last night, and I'm trying not to, have an aneurysm from watching mama move around. Now, some mamas, when you watch them move, they can be 400 or 500 pounds, but they move like surgeons, piggy surgeons. I know it may sound crazy, but the way some of them move, they're very delicate, they're very precise, they're methodical in their movements, they move carefully and slowly. If they hear a peep or a squeak from the baby, they back up. Great spatial awareness. Other animals, and I feel like this is breed specific in terms of what I have seen, but the Durocs, they're beautiful pigs, huge, muscular, just magnificent animals. However, the Durocs that I have had as mamas, as sows, they are just all thumbs when it comes to having their babies, and they're just stomping and romping, and they're all over the place. And I just can't watch because you can't get in there and rescue the babies and kind of pull them out from underneath all the time, and you can do some of that, but then there's a certain point at which you can't do that, and so you kinda have to just trust the pigs to do their job and be pigs, and either they're gonna be successful or they're not, and ultimately, it's the animals that give you anxiety that you can't leave them by themselves, those are the ones that you have to cull them and turn them into sausage, which, Brandon, I don't know if you're tuned in here still, but we can definitely talk about, turning JoJo into sausage because she's struck out after a number of different, opportunities. But anyways, what wound up happening was the 3 little pigs, literally, they wound up as the babies are born, and you can see in the short, they have, like, mucus and afterbirth, and it all sounds really tasty, but there's also placenta and blood, and it's some blood and guts that are coming out. It's kind of gory. And usually what happens is after mama has her babies, she'll stand up and she'll eat the placenta because it has a lot of rich red blood cells, which again doesn't sound super tasty to me. But the fact that they eat their placenta is actually very healthy and it gives them energy and it helps replenish the blood cells and the iron that they lost potentially in the process of farrowing and having the babies. And as these babies were coming out, the three other little pigs that were just kind of hanging out there, they got into nibbling on some of the placenta, and I wanna say it was an accident, but I'm not sure. All I know is that by the time I came back into the barn, a couple hours later, I found the 3 little pigs, like, tearing apart the newborn piglets, and they had torn apart 2 of them, 2 of the nicest ones, actually, and there was a 3rd that it looked like they had gotten started trying to just eat some of the or nibble on some of the umbilical cords, and they actually had punctured the one little guy's stomach, and it was hard to assess and say how deep it went, but at that point, something kinda snapped in my head because these are piglets that I have customers that are depending on them, and when you see a helpless baby getting just savaged and torn apart by another animal that literally has a bowl full of grain a body length away from it, um, I took one of them and I moved it to a different area because I was one of the ones that was less aggressive towards the little ones. The one that was most aggressive, I executed him immediately. I wish I could say that it was my cleanest shot, but it wasn't, and it's like it was upsetting, and it was a very unpleasant place to be in because there was no part of it that felt good having to put down an animal, but when it has acquired a taste for blood and there's nowhere else that you can reasonably put this animal, and there's more mamas that are gonna be having more babies, and they have to kinda be in there, that's the only option that you're left with, and at the end of the day, I do have to take some responsibility for it because the decision that I made to not, put them down 6 months ago was the decision that ultimately led to this incident arising and then having to put them down now. I only put the one down so far. The other one I separated out because that one was big enough that I could get out of the way, and then the other one actually had, like, a bad leg, and so she had an injured shoulder, I should say, so her front paw was injured, so she wasn't able to really move around, and she wasn't as aggressive, and it looked to me I watched her for another couple of hours with the babies, and she wasn't, like, going after them, she was just eating kind of leftovers and scraps, which still is pretty gnarly, but I didn't wanna have to see any more death because you're excited seeing the new life come into the world, but you also have to deal with animals that never even get to realize their potential, and they're so great looking and they look beautiful, and then mama steps on them, or their cousin like decides that they're gonna turn them into a Slim Jim, and now they're gone, and then on top of it, now you have another pig that you gotta remove with extreme prejudice, and then you also have to be careful when you're doing that because the gunshot goes off, and then the mamas are all fit to be tied, so they got in there with their babies, and there's some pens that I got with surrounding in the surrounding area with piglets, and once they realize kind of what's going on, then they're romping and stomping and worried about, "Hey, you hear that? What's going on?" And everybody is all excited, and the energy gets really dark really quickly. But the saying goes, as I've heard it said many times, and I agree with this 110%, there is no livestock without dead stock. And farming is something that forces you to grow up in ways that you probably wouldn't encounter in many places in the real world. Like one of the things about farming, I was never in the military. I have not, and Lord willing, I will never have to be put in a situation where I have to take life, human life. But the reality is that taking life and farming, there's a tremendous amount of death that is implicit in what you're doing because these cute little piglets, even if they all survive and the litter is super healthy, when you're sitting there with them, that there's going to be a time when that animal is going to be bacon, and you're feeding it because it's going to feed you. And so that's initially already part of the conversation. But when you have to take a life, and especially when you're taking a life in response to other lives that have already been taken, and then you have to take this one to prevent further loss and further damage, it is it's not easy. It's not easy, and to me, this type of taking a life in a farming context is way harder and way worse than slaughtering a pig that's gonna go on your plate versus just offing a pig because it is killing the babies, and you gotta make it stop because it just turned into something snapped in its head, and now it's just eating everybody. And it's also, it's frustrating, but with farming, as I am learning and as I have learned and keep learning over and over again, the mistakes that you make today you're going to have no idea that you made that mistake until it's 6 months later, and trying to rectify that mistake becomes much harder. And 6 months ago, my thought was, well, I'm going to bet on these little guys. I'm going to see if we can rehabilitate them. A couple of shots of penicillin here and there, and we'll get them to grow out. They'll get better because they were kind of sickly because they were lacking the immunity from not being able to nurse mama when she died. So as orphans, they had some infections that I had to kind of help them get over. But then after they survived, it was like, okay, they're going to make it, and you're kind of betting on them and you're hoping, and then something like this happens and it changes the whole thing, and you wind up with more death and destruction because you thought that you were going to be a softie and say, you know what, I can find a place for these little guys and we'll make it work. When and I'm not necessarily saying that I regret keeping them alive, because at the end of the day I think that's just the way that I deal with my animals, is that I'm going to bet on them. I'm gonna bet on them to do well and to be good, and there's a risk that goes with that, and so one way or the other, you're gonna have to face that risk and deal with that challenge, either on the front end, where you cull hard and fast. And this is the hardest part about breeding, is that you don't give second chances, you don't give third chances, you don't make excuses. You say, look, these are the standards, and everybody has to live up to that standard. And I've only been doing this for 4 years now, so I'm hoping that maybe once I cross the 10-year mark, I'll be a little bit better at detaching a little bit more, being a little colder, and just saying, okay, these are the rules. And like, if you can't make the grade, then that's it. You go to the freezer and it's a done deal. But it's hard. And even knowing that intellectually, like, I'm very consciously aware of that shortcoming. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want to have to, you know, I don't wanna have to pull the trigger, and it's a pain to deal with a dead animal. Even if you're harvesting it, it's a pain, or butchering it. So, thank you, Brandon. I appreciate you tuning in, and, yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. And it's hard in ways that, like, I never would have realized going into it, and until you have somebody shit the bed in a massive way like that, you don't it's like my first year farrowing, everything went great. I had one that was a little complicated. She got a stuck piglet, and I had to reach in and pull it out and give her some penicillin afterwards, but everybody recovered. There was, most of the babies made it okay, and I was just like, the beginner's luck, let's say, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't that bad. Like, what are they talking about with the piglets and farrowing being difficult? Why doesn't everybody just start off doing this?" And then kinda in subsequent seasons of farrowing, usually I do like a summer and winter, or like late summer, early fall, and springish time of year farrowing. So I do twice a year where I'm breeding back and farrowing. But I've gotten a education on how dark farrowing can be. But at the same time, when I have made the choice to cull animals and to really prioritize the welfare of the more productive animals in like the 2 or 3 times that I've done that successfully. When you come out there in the morning and mama's just hanging out and she's got, 10, 11 babies, and babies are happy and mama's cool and nobody's jumping all over the place and, trying to eat each other and tear each other apart. I mean, even good mamas, you'll have maybe 1 or 2 babies that get squashed, or you'll have, a baby that's stillborn. Like the last baby from the litter last night was stillborn, and there was a total of 12, and we went down. So one was stillborn, that took us to 11, then 2 got eaten by the other piglets. That kinda left us with, 9, and of course, one of those that was left was the one that had the hole in his stomach. It was a tiny little hole. I was hoping he might be okay. And then there were 4 that ultimately got presumably stepped on, and today while I was at work, so we got, 5 at this point that are alive, and, we'll have to see kinda where the rest of the litters turn out. So, it feels good to be able to vent about this a little bit honestly and share this with you guys, because this is not something that, like, I work at a hospital, and so, I mean, people kind of know at this point what to expect from me when they say, "Oh, hey, Steve, what's going on? How are the pigs?" Everybody kind of jokes with me, and you know, when people ask me a question, I'm gonna give them the honest answer. So you wanna know how it's going with the pigs? Well, let me tell you what I was doing last night at 11:30 when I was, in mud up to my ankles, burying the remnants of the litter, that was left over, and there was another piglet that had gotten squashed from one of the earlier litters too, so I was just kinda like, there's a lot of death. And that's how new life comes into the world. It takes a lot of death sometimes in order to achieve that. And so I'm appreciative that you guys were able to join me here this afternoon to listen to this and chat with me about it. Anybody that is here who hasn't subscribed, I would love it if you subscribe to the channel. Drop comments. I posted a long, I mean, for long-ish video. It's not technically a short, it's like 6 minutes, talking a little bit about how I first got into farming. I think I posted that yesterday, and then I posted a short just a little bit before the stream showing some of the delivery or the farrowing, not delivery. It's not, people or do delivery, pigs farrow. I got to get my terminology appropriate when going between the people medicine and animal medicine. But yeah, got some new videos out there, and I'm always interested in answering questions, topics, and finding things where I have an opinion on it, because it's always easier to make videos about things if I have an opinion about something, and um, I'm still feeling those issues out. I know the big thing that I have an opinion about, and I promise I'm not going to get too into the weeds about this, but just kind of the way I'll save this for another, maybe next Tuesday. I'll do a stream and we can talk a little bit about the USDA and how gatekeeping and regulation by federal and in some cases state agencies really just kneecap small farms and small farmers and make it impossible for us to literally compete with with Walmart and Kroger and all the Smithfield pork of the world. And it's all the stuff with good intentions, because, oh, we just want to make sure you're safe, so we have to make sure that you process your meat this way and you only go to these facilities and only these people are inspecting it. But ps, if you don't have like 10 animals that are ready to go at a clip and you're only raising where your pigs where you can do 2 or 3 at a time here and there, good luck getting a butcher date, because it's never going to happen. And in the meantime, you're trying to sell an entire hog to a person who's like, "Well, I just want a couple of pounds of bacon. Can I do that?" Nope, sorry. If I sell you a couple of pounds of bacon and sell the pork chops to my neighbor down the street, then we all go to jail. So it's uh, it's an interesting state of affairs, and people wonder why farm raised food is so expensive and hard to find, and why farmers retire, and why the land gets sold to make housing developments instead of staying as a farm. And people buy farms and they turn them into like wedding venues and stuff like that. And whatever, those things are cool. I'm not hating. Well, yeah, I am kind of hating on that. I think it would be better served. We could do with a lot fewer wedding. I mean, you could have a functional farm where people could have weddings on it, and it could still principally function as a farm. In addition to doing wedding venue type of stuff. So no hate to the wedding venues, but like the primary service would be to grow food for a community so that we could have more food that is able to be eaten by people locally at a price that they can afford, instead of having stuff be USDA inspected but shipped halfway across the country or halfway around the world in some cases, and then processed in country and then sold to you as, USA product of the USA, when the reality is the farmer down the street really needs you to buy some pork or some piglets off of them and get involved. And I guess that's part of the reason why, in closing, Make America Farmers Again is what I want to encourage us to be doing here, because the more people that start participating, even if you're participating by buying some bacon from a farmer who's going to give you a long-winded rant about why the USDA is such a problem, you're getting involved and becoming aware of the things that are actually going on. And I was pretty well read and politically and socially aware of a lot of different things. And I had no idea that this whole group of people who are actually feeding all of us every single day were having these kind of challenges operating on a smaller scale because of very simple things that could very easily be done away with without increasing any level of harm meaningfully. So I challenge you to fight me on that in the comments. And with that, I am going to uh, bid you all a good evening. I apologize I was a little bit late. And to my beautiful wife, Myra, if you are watching this, I am sorry that it took me so long to get my act together. But thank you also, dear, for getting the Charlotte in the barn. My wife was it my so the pig that I've been trying to move that was giving me a raft of shit for days, and she's just about to have her babies, but she insists on staying in the barn with the other pigs. And it's like, dude, you need to go and have your babies. Just come out of the barn. Let me put you in the other part of the barn where it's dry, and under no circumstances would she have anything to do with that. But then she broke out while I was at work, and I'm just about to go live, and my wife is texting me and she's saying, "Hey, oh, Charlotte broke out." And it's like, okay, my wife is at home dealing with a pig who is broken out of the barn. Do I go live and let my wife deal with it and hope everything turns out okay, or do I go home and not do the live? Do I wait till it's resolved and then go live, which is ultimately what I did. So I wasn't able to be much help other than to just give some moral support, but very thankful to my wife. And this is not the first time, and there may be something to this. There might be a lesson that I could learn from this, but this is not the first time that I have struggled to move a pig that I really needed to get moved. And through happenstance, my wife and or some of our girls were able to finagle this animal into the place that it needed to be, and I didn't really tell them precisely how to do it. I just said, "I need the animal to be in this place. Can you do that?" And they didn't really have a choice because I wasn't around. I was, at work at these various instances when this has happened. And then lo and behold, they do it. So proud of you girls at home. Thankful for all you guys here who have watched. If you're live, those of you who are watching after the fact, my hat is literally off to you for making it through 34 minutes of my ranting and raving. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. I will do a live stream, presumably on Tuesday. I post updates like on the posts. You can post like pictures and comments and stuff. I'll do posts occasionally. I'll post a picture over the weekend because my cell service at my house is, hey, Myra. There's my wife. I never call her Myra. We only call each other by our first names if we're pissed at each other. But on here, um, thank you, babe. I love you too. Thank you for getting Charlotte in the barn. That was like massive. That I'm super happy. Hopefully Charlotte doesn't like get into a fight with the other mamas and then stomp on what's left of the litters in there. But fingers crossed. I don't want to think about that right now. I can't. Um, but yeah, I sometimes I'll post photos and stuff to just like update over the weekend because the cell service at my place is so lousy. The wife was telling me we should do a live stream from the barn, which would be great. But the problem is getting stuff to load in the barn is a nightmare because you got one bar of service sometimes. And so, like, I can't even really watch YouTube videos in there. I can listen to a podcast most of the time, but then if the podcast ends, like to load the next one, it won't the service won't reach, and I have to kind of walk up the driveway and get it to reload, and I spend like half of my time trying to get the podcasts to load in the barn. So it's real fun. Now we did try Starlink. We did try Starlink, and not really great performance by Starlink either. I suspect that if you have a high enough pole, a long enough mast, as it were, to get it up so that the satellite, the dish, whatever you want to call the little receiver, is high enough where it can see over the trees, that it would work exceptionally well. The problem is that I don't have like a 70-foot pole to attach that to, and if I had the money for that, I would probably put that into improving the barn so that I don't have these kind of streams to do for you in the future, telling you about all the tragedy that I had to deal with the night before. So, on that note, um, sweetheart, I love you. Brandon, I'm assuming you're the other person who is in here because I see we got two people in here right now. I appreciate you being in here. And everybody else, thank you for suffering through this. Comment, share, like, subscribe, rant and rave, flame me, share this with vegans. I really want to start getting vegans to troll me because I feel like once you have trolls, that's when you're making an impact in the world. And I really enjoy going back and forth with vegans, and I'm looking forward to doing some nice WWE style vegan debate content. So, anyways, guys, I'm gonna call it there. Leave your comments, get a hold of me, and I will be happy to respond. You guys have a good weekend, and we will see you on the flip side here.